All right, our next presentation is on gemstone production from artisanal sources. And our presenter is my friend, Dr. Brad Ross. Brad and I have worked together on a number of occasions on the material for the mining law course. And Brad right now is involved with the Global Mining Education Foundation, which is aimed at encouraging and producing material for mining education. Before that, Brad was the director of the Lowell Institute for Mineral Resources, along with a number of other positions too. And the reason that I wanted to talk to Brad about this is that his doctoral dissertation was on artisanal mining, aimed principally at Namibia.
Namibia, yes.
So how much time did you spend in Namibia?
So my family and I spent 3.5 years in Namibia.
Yeah.
And I was working for Rio Tinto at the Rössing uranium mine, and I've always collected minerals for a long time and such. And Namibia is a fantastic place for minerals and gemstones. And so while we were there, when I was working there, we actually dealt a lot with artisanal miners, and that led me to when I came back and started working on my PhD, it was really about what was the sustainability of artisanal mining in Namibia and other places. And so,
now, when you said you dealt with artisanal miners a lot, was that on behalf of Rio Tinto, or was it privately?
Well, it started out privately. That I actually was a small scale miner myself here in the United States, and I had a small business where I would collect fossils actually and sell them here at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. So when I went to Namibia and we started looking at minerals and such, we were doing that privately, but it turned out that by looking at the sustainability, the company I worked for, Rössing Uranium, they actually took on the community side of artisanal mining and how, since every mine doesn't last forever, whenever they finish up mining there, how can they encourage artisanal mining to be a economic driver for the area?
Okay.
And so they actually encouraged the work, and I did a number of things. My family and I actually did a number of things with the company to bring different groups together to actually help and support the artisanal miners. Mm-hmm. So it is pretty unique because a lot of places there's more competition or between large-scale mining and small-scale mining or artisanal mining. But in this particular case, it was collaborative.
And so it was coming from Rio Tinto that they were encouraging this.
Yeah, well, yes, and through the local company Rössing, and so the Rössing leadership in particular, they were very supportive.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Well, we have our first couple slides are of the some of the artisanal mining efforts. This first one here looks like. Well, why don't you just describe what we're looking at?
So this is a quartz miner in Namibia, a place called Hobobos, and they mine quartz crystals primarily there, and it's world famous for their quartz crystals. But this is really typical of artisanal miners. It's done manually, hammer and chisel, a lot of hard work, and I grew a great appreciation for how hard these guys actually work. Mm-hmm. It's pretty incredible, really. I spent a little time trying to dig myself, and I don't think I want to do that for a living.
How big are these crystals that they're?
Well, they range in size. The quartz crystals in this case, they could be an inch anywhere to 6 or 7 or 8 inches, so they can get fairly large.
And this looks like a fairly unsafe.
This is really unsafe, and that's also typical of artisanal mining. And a lot of times they are they don't mine very safely. They don't have a lot of the skills and the understanding that we would, but they do know how to find the minerals. And so this is Topaz Miner. It's a place called Spitzkoppe. It's a beautiful area, but and this is a riverbed actually, and so it's a pretty loose material, and so he's actually undercutting, looking for topaz crystals, and they find some by doing that. And but yeah, it's pretty typical that it can be quite dangerous, the work that they do. Now this is not Namibia, but this is, you know, when we think about artisanal miners, I know we're talking about gemstones, but with that also comes gold miners in a lot of places. And there, a lot of times you'll see children working in areas where there's mining, and it's a family affair at times. And so the picture on the left, they're actually, they've got an amalgamation with mercury and gold, and they burn off the mercury, which can be extremely hazardous. Mm-hmm. And so they have the family there, and so that's a relatively dangerous procedures that they're following there.
Now we're looking at this little girl that's using a pan for gold. Now, would this be typical of the operation? In other words, as a family operation, as opposed to using children for someone else's operation?
Yeah. So you know, it's generally a family affair. Now, it's pretty unusual you see the children actually working directly in the mining portion. In a lot of cultures, it's pretty unusual to see women doing that, although that's changing. But at the end of the day, a lot of it comes back to the family, mm-hmm. and so they do get involved in one form or another.
Well, I do remember that on the waste areas in Potosi in Bolivia, that you see a lot of women and children there. Yep. Just reprocessing the waste material there.
And Freeport in Indonesia, you see a lot of that as well. That you know, they're you know, it's typically the precious either minerals like gold or silver, or it's the gemstones that mm-hmm. you typically see a lot of the artisanal mining in anyway because of the value. But yeah, and so they get involved sometimes in the production side of things, but more often than not in the sales side of things.
Okay. Now this is a sort of a lot of us have seen this type of an image.
And this is not Namibia either. There's water there. In Namibia, in the central part of the country, that there is really no water. But you know, and again, the point about this is that they can have pretty large extents of impact to the environment. And in Namibia, you'll see that as well. That although it's not in the streams, but they'll uncover large areas. And so, especially in places like Namibia, where a lot of the economy is based upon tourism, mm-hmm. That can have a negative impact. But at the same time, these are a lot of people that are making a living.
Now, an image like this, would this group be organized in some way?
Usually you'll find that most people, in Namibia particularly, that they were individual miners or small groups, 5 or 6 people. But there's generally middlemen that at times will maybe help fund, pay for food and that type of thing, tools, and in which case they may have a larger group that they might be organizing and supporting. So it varies regionally whether or not it's highly organized. And of course, there are some areas, we've heard everybody's heard of blood diamonds and that type of thing where people are forced into working in areas. Now that's not Namibia, but there are certainly cases where there is a concerted effort to really bring people together, basically force them to mine mm-hmm. gemstones and gold.
Now, an image like this too, would the organizers of this be taking a percentage of production, or would it be the other way around?
A lot of times what happens is the artisanal miners mine. So the way it would work in Namibia, a person or a small group would mine, a third party would come in, they would buy the material at a very low price. And then that middleman would then go and sell it to perhaps a foreigner that would come in and buy from several middlemen. And the price would at least double. When they do that, then that foreigner would take it to their market, maybe somebody that actually prepares the gemstones and such, and the price is going to double again. And then maybe 2 or 3 times later, it will actually get to the final retail market. And so the price starts out maybe at $1 for a gemstone, and it might be $10, $15, $20 by the time it gets to the retail market. And so you have there's this value chain that happens. And so, that's actually one of the big problems is how do the people that produce it get closer to the final market?
Yeah. Well, this is just another image probably growing out of that last image that we looked at.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can talk about going through the classic definition of artisanal mining.
The artisanal miners, first of all, it is typically very manual. That it's hammer and chisel and basic tools that they utilize. It has very little mechanism. There are times when you do see some mechanism, but it's pretty unusual in most cases. They have very limited capital. But what they do have is they live in an area that has some sort of mineral resources. But the capital is important because a lot of times they end up mining illegally because to get land tenure can be difficult. And at the end of the day, they're making a living based upon their manual work, their labor. And so
now the absence of land tenure strikes me as a real problem.
It's a real problem.
And so in effect, what you're doing is that if you're there, you just need to be able to defend your position.
Yeah, and it becomes a real problem. A lot of times they have a home someplace else than where they work because they're not there legally, and so they'll set up a camp that they just move into. But as they're working, if they find things, there's things that you don't think about. So if they find some good things and they bring it back to their hut, and I'll show you some pictures later on. Now, what do you do with it to protect it? Because when you go back to work the next day, it's not protected very well, right? Because you can't lock the door, and so that can be a problem of how do you actually bank and store and to create this commerce? And
do people ever have their own self-protection? People that are defined as it's your job to protect.
They can do that, and that's why you end up with some of them that they group together into small groups to be able to work together and so that they can provide protection for each other and other things as well. But there are a lot of people, and these are the 13 million. There's estimates today that it's up closer to 30 million.
Really?
But there's not really a good way to measure how many people. We know it's a lot, and it's worldwide. And it covers not just gemstones, it's the gold and copper. In places like China, I think it's changing now, but coal mining or coal was done by artisanal miners at times.
Wow.
And so, but at the end of the day, what happens with a lot of the artisanal miners, they end up in this kind of cycle of poverty that they do find some good things at times and they do make some good money at times, but they still end up not being able to create the investment to build their enterprise and get out of that cycle.
Now we talk about some countries actually have laws that is associated with small scale mining.
There are, and there's actually some places that they have laws more typically than not to prevent artisanal mining. But so in the small scale mining, there's kind of there's a gradation, right? From one guy with a hammer and chisel, and it grades all the way up to the autonomous trucks, right? And for mining, and so you start out the artisanal mining. If you get to a point where you have maybe some mechanism, maybe a little bit more capital, people working together a bit more, then you get to small scale mining, and there's generally less regulation on the smaller scales, and compared to the larger scale mines, and so, but different countries, it depends on what's going on, because take Namibia, for instance. They leave a lot of latitude to the government for small scale gems, semi-precious gems mining. But when it comes to diamonds, they leave no latitude, because they're in partnership between the government of Namibia and De Beers, or NAMDEB, their major diamond mining company. So if there is no selling of diamonds in Namibia in a free market type of deal.
Is that mainly the result of the connection with De Beers?
Oh, sure, because the government itself makes money off the diamonds. Mm-hmm. That's a major income source for the country, and so they protect that. And so they regulate it in very strictly compared to all the other gemstones.
And so this would be a formal relationship between De Beers and the government?
Oh yeah, no, very formal. Very large scale mining. They actually, they do major dredge mining offshore, for instance. And so no, it's a major business.
But the areas where you would find diamonds, is that not the same geological environment that you find
it's
most
not.
of the other stuff?
Yeah, so the diamonds there are actually washed in. They're not in place diamonds. It's and so they find them on the beaches actually. Okay. And whereas most of the other semi-precious stones are found in pegmatites and hard rock mining.
A good reason to go to the beaches in Namibia, huh?
Well, you can't. The beaches that have the diamonds are controlled by NAMDEB, and you can get permits to cross them sometimes, but they actually put transponders on your vehicle, and if you stop, they know it, and you will be searched because you stopped.
Interesting.
So they control it quite well.
Here are just some images. We asked the question, why does artisanal mining exist? I think we probably answered that question.
Yeah,
already.
it's all about the families. Well, a lot of it's about the families. How do you make a living? At the time when I was there, unemployment if you were under 30 was 30%, plus 30%. And if you have a young family and such, to find a job to make a reasonable living is pretty difficult. But artisanal miners, they do make some money, and they can make a living at it. And at the end of the day, it's to take care of their family. This is a location called New Schwaben, and you can kind of see one of their houses in the background. It's just tarps and any type of material that they can build with. And these kids were, this is where they played and lived, and their folks, their dads in particular, would be mining not too far from here, looking for tourmaline, actually. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can see that they do have a car in the background.
Sometimes.
That probably works even.
Sometimes, but most of them don't. Yeah, driving is actually, a lot of times they have to find rides to get away, to sell their goods and stuff.
Well, here have the elements of artisanal mining process, and you want to just
So this is kind of any mining in reality, if you think about it. So you really got to start out with there's got to be an investment, and the artisanal miners have very little to invest, and so their investment a lot of times in Namibia is food to last them for several weeks, 3, 4, or 5 weeks, as well as a couple tools, basic tools. They probably don't have money to invest in land tenure, and they don't have a lot of money to invest in learning their skills. So what they do is they go out, they get a relative or a friend that's doing their artisanal mining, they go out with them and they start mining. And that's the investment. And they do find ways to produce, and they go to different areas by going with people that know they can start finding gemstones, quartz crystals, topaz crystals, tourmaline crystals, those types of things. But it is a very dangerous business.
Yeah.
And so one of the big impacts to production is safety. If you get hurt, it's hard to produce.
Well, I can see too. It probably depends on what you're producing. If some of these gems are more high value, that you probably need more protection for those.
There is. Well, not only protection, but how you produce them, because a lot of gemstones and such, if you damage them, you ruin their value. And so a lot of times they don't have all the skills to get the full value out of them, because they don't actually mine them in a way that creates the most value, and so that can be a problem.
Which brings us to the sales element here.
And the sales is a problem because most of these guys are miles and miles away from any village or anything else, and so how do you get to that marketplace? And like I mentioned before, you have these middlemen that come in and buy from them. And if you're buying at a local where they actually mine it, they are not in a very good position to negotiate. And they always love seeing me come to buy minerals, because I probably didn't negotiate. I was probably not as good a negotiator as some of these middlemen. And I would do things, you think about these guys, they've been working in a remote area for weeks. And so we would always bring food, and other buyers would bring food too. And the typical way to do it is, you want cans of meat or whatever, well, they would jack up the price. And so they're bartering, and the person with the most has the best position to negotiate wins a lot of times. But what I would do, we'd negotiate a price, and then I would bring my sales receipt and said, okay, anything you want, you will trade it even across. And so they always like seeing me come around, because I probably was not as good a negotiator as some other people.
Well, you were in a different position too, as being sort of a collector yourself.
No, that's
you
right.
weren't working at it as a resale market.
No, that's right.
Yeah. And then here,
consumption is really important. So now they do make some money, but Namibia's a really interesting place. The culture there is, a lot of people don't have a lot. The economic status is pretty low. And if you make a fair amount of money, you're kind of expected to not only support your immediate family, but also an extended family at that point.
Yeah.
And so, they come back home. Like I said, a lot of times their family may be miles away. They sell enough things, they make a little bit of money, and all of a sudden you're going to be taking care of a lot more people.
Yeah. Well, and that also brings back the need for investment back into the process.
And so, and what happens is that a lot of times you don't invest in more efficient tools and knowledge and stuff. You go back and you start kind of over again, and now you kind of got this cycle.
Yeah.
And that cycle can change depending upon who they are, and even things like banking, right? if you make a bunch of money, but you can't open a bank account, what do you do with that money? You know, how do you save it? And so you and I don't think about that. That doesn't really cross our mind, but we can put things in a savings account and we can get interest on money. Not so true there. And so, they end up not, a lot of times not spending it. But some cases, if you go to the next, you can create a cycle of wealth. That there are guys that plan ahead and they save a little bit more money each time, and every time they go out they have a little bit better equipment. Or sometimes they strike it rich. They find some pocket that has fantastic things and they can buy some equipment. But unfortunately, a lot of times they don't have the skills and the knowledge and the background to save or to learn how to take care of that equipment. So
which results in the same sort of the cycle of poverty that is essentially the same elements here.
That's right.
As well as, and you have a next one is the
cycle of depression. That if you get hurt, you're not going to produce as much. If you get into an area that is not as good production-wise, it's going to cost as well. And so that you can actually start going down and down and to the point where, you know, you're not making a living anymore.
Okay, your next description here is the components of the model. What are we talking about here?
Investment, you're not just talking about the tools, you're talking about the skills, you're talking about land tenure. Those are all things that they need to invest in, but can be very difficult. And if you're looking at production, it's the resource. What are you mining? You know, the tenure is tied to that, obviously. You can have better tools, or if you don't have good tools, then you're not going to be able to protect the gemstones as much as you should. And there's also those mining methods. So, and this health and safety, you know, just the basic things like PPE that we take for granted, you know, they don't have that. And so, and the skills of how to do things safely, they don't think about that. And so that leads to the sales. You know, sales is about quality and quantity. Can they make it better? Can they process it? And then the demand. And so it's supply and demand at the end of the day. And if you're not selling in the larger marketplace, you know, the biggest marketplace in the world for most of these stones that they mine is Tucson, Arizona in February at the Gem and Mineral. So we actually have the largest marketplace in the world. But for them to get here, that's pretty difficult.
How many levels would you have to go through before you got to the
Typically
Gem and Mineral
there's 3 to 4 levels to go from the miner to get here, and probably 4 to 5 actually. And so
are there any specific dealers that are fairly active in the Tucson market?
Oh yeah. Well, the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show brings people from all over the world, and so any dealer that has good material ends up in Tucson one way or another. And so this market in February is incredible, but pretty difficult for the artisanal miners themselves to participate in that market.
Yeah. And which I suppose gets us over to the consumption and back to investment.
Right. And just meeting those basic needs, having the expenses, and you know, Namibia is an interesting place because one of the things with consumption, and I mentioned this extended family, but there's lots of different tribes in Namibia, and each group has different values and different norms. But a lot of them, one of their biggest value is kids, and so having more kids is important to people.
Would the tribes be the ones providing an element of protection in this whole process?
So not so much. So the tribes they do have formal structures, but they don't they don't necessarily have a police force. That's typically left to the cities and stuff. But
well, I wasn't thinking so much of police force, but just the your friends maybe that provide enforcement of
and
of a
there can be, but each culture is a little bit different, and so there is competition for getting the minerals and such, and having that value. Corruption. There is some corruption in places like Namibia as well, and so that you have to worry about that as well. And so there's different types of environments. So this is the model, but if you go to hit the next one, there's the physical environment that has a big impact on this whole model. And so for Namibia, it's very hot and desolate and such. And so that physical environment is difficult to mine in, but at the same time, it's a physical environment that there are minerals available.
Yeah.
And so that's important. But then there's this social, cultural environment. At the time that I was there, HIV/AIDS was prevalent. Over 20% of the population was HIV positive. And that causes a lot of different things to happen as well, in how people work together and that type of thing. And so, you have to be aware of that social, cultural environment, the fact that you can't get all the things you want. And then, of course, the political side. Some places, the political side is very anti-artisanal mining. It's competition with the big miners, and so there can be laws and things that put in place that kind of make it more difficult for miners, artisanal miners, or make it illegal completely.
Would that be primarily in areas where the gemstones might be occurring in the same geologic environment as major minerals?
Yeah, and so, or if the miners can make money off the same material that the large miners are mining. So the Congo, for instance, they mine copper, but a lot of it's very high grade copper. Mm-hmm. Much higher grade than what you see in a mine here. You wouldn't have an artisanal miner trying to compete against Saarita or one of our mines here, but in Namibia, they can actually make a living with the high grade copper that they have there.
Well, I know in the Congo, for example, you see a lot of the gem quality in
malachite, azurite. That's exactly right. And so they can make even more money off of that than even for the copper. And so you end up with, in cases, there's a lot of places around the world where the artisanal miners and the large-scale miners are competing for the same resource. Now, that's not true so much in Namibia, but there are other places in the world that certainly is true. And so, artisanal miners typically don't pay royalty because they're mining illegally potentially to begin with, and so the government is typically going to support the larger scale miners because that's where their income comes from.
Well, it always struck me as interesting because right in the area where Copper World is developing right now, was a classic source of malachite and azurite collection.
Yep. No, that's right. Now, in a lot of those cases, though, the source of those specimens comes from large-scale mines.
Yeah.
Large-scale miners. The miners themselves, as they're mining, maybe take some of the material and sell it outside of the typical business of the mining company itself. And so the source is the miners that work for the mining companies and not artisanal miners that are just working for themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different.
So it is probably a good thought from a large mine to be able to set up a special way of working with.
You see that where there are large companies that say there's value here, and so we break into a great pocket. We're going to save that material, and we're gonna collect it ourselves and sell it. But more likely, what they're going to say is, that just slows down our production, and they're going to put rules against people picking up things so that because they don't want to slow down, and it's a balance, right? But it's unfortunate at times because there are some fantastic resources that
sometimes these occurrences occur in kind of in a vacuum, like the glove mine, for example. That was a mine that really wasn't operating particularly until they broke into an area with fantastic wolframite.
Yep. No, that's right. And then you can actually make mines that just work on specimens. Brian Lee's and some of the work that they did with rhodochrosite up in Colorado and such are just specimen mine, large scale specimen mines, are relatively large scale. But wouldn't be a Saarite or something like that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something that's closer to home for you. The
Okay.
Namibia case study.
Yeah. Namibia is when I went to Namibia, when I told people I was going to go to work in Namibia, I generally had the question, well, where's Namibia? And, just north of South Africa and just south of Angola on the west coast of Africa, southern coast of Africa. And it's a large country. It's about the size of Texas, but it only has like 1.5 million people. And so there's a lot of empty space.
Well, and here's a classic empty space picture.
And that's really typical. But it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country. The scenery is majestic. There's very little water. The only rivers that run are on the very southern border and at the very northern border. Everything else in the middle doesn't have water. And the animals, this is real Africa. And you see things, elephants that live in the desert. Next slide. That you don't expect to see elephants in the desert, and this is one of the few localities that they do that. And so it's an incredible place to live. Actually, we loved it there. This is
obviously where you lived.
Yeah, this was not my house. My house was actually on the beach, so I'll never live in another place like this. This is a pretty typical miner's home where they stay when they're working. And this is Hobobos is the place that they're mining quartz crystals.
Yeah, and there's a couple of the quartz crystals right there.
Yeah, and take a close look at the guy in the middle there. Look at his eyes. The first time I met him, he had two good eyes, and they're using hammer and chisels, and you'll look at the eye on the left, and so he's lost one eye. So when I visited him to buy crystals from him, he can only see out of one eye. Now, he works in a very dangerous occupation, so one of the things, I left him safety glasses so that hopefully he'll be able to protect his other eye for at least a while. But
now the crystals that they have there, what would sort of price would something like that bring in the first sale?
In the first sale, well, at that time, I don't know, I probably paid, probably $40, $50 maybe.
Oh, really? Okay.
But, here you would sell them for hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
Several. This is also Hobobos. I saw these guys walking from their camp, and they had these containers. Now, this is a really arid area. And so I drove up to them. I said, "Where are you going?" They said, "Well, we're going to go get water." I said, "Okay, you want to ride?" And it's about 2 miles from where they're camped. And so this is the water hole. And this is a area where just you had this kind of natural dam. And if you take a look at that water and what they're going to be drinking from, you and I probably wouldn't ever drink from that water. And there's big tarantulas and stuff that had died in there. And so I asked him, "Well, did you get sick? drinking this water? They said, well, yeah, you know, the first couple of weeks, but you get used to it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I assume you didn't try any.
I did not try any. This is where they sell. This is what we call the crossroads. So these are family members. And so that the husbands would bring things and they would sell them along. And then the tourist would drive up. Now, this is not where the good stuff was sold. This is what they would sell to tourists primarily. And so there'd be 15, 20 different family groups that would be selling minerals alongside the road. And people would just drive up and stop and buy minerals. Physical, you know, this is Hobobos again. It's a pretty desolate area. That's Brandberg Mountains, but you know, to me, that's $1 million view. If I was, so they do have some amazing landscapes that they have in the country.
Well, let's shift to the social and cultural issues.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of different tribes. This is a Herero. They were almost decimated by the Germans, actually. And they actually took on a colonial dress. The women would still wear these long dresses. And the hat that they wear, they have a lot of value in cattle, actually. And so the hat is to represent the horns on the cattle.
I can see some goats in the picture there, too.
Well, it's really interesting. They primarily only eat meat. I've never seen a culture that eats almost strictly meat. You go to a bride, it's incredible. Mm-hmm. Their vegetables and such are not really on the menu. And so every place is different. And this is Swakopmund, where I lived. It's kind of like in some ways a Bavarian, you know, a village in Bavaria more than Africa. And but so that's the main town. You can see the lower right, but up in the upper left is Modessa, and it's kind of 3 towns in one. And so, you know, a lot of the German background lived in Swakopmund proper. And then as you go further away from the center of the town, the economic status goes down and down. And a lot of the places in Modessa and such don't have indoor plumbing and such.
But the image on the lower right, is that a multi-family place or a hotel?
That's a hotel.
Okay.
Yeah. And they have several buildings that, like Bavaria, it's just incredible. And you know, this is just family. This is a place where I went to buy minerals from one of the miners in Usakos. And so, you know, as we're buying minerals, there's always kids around, and it's really interesting. So, you know, there's a lot. Polygamy is really common there. They support, when they find a lot, they not only support their extended family, but friends. I mentioned HIV, and they don't have banks, they can't open up accounts a lot of times. And even if they do get money and they buy equipment, they don't actually have the background of how to maintain the equipment, and that can be a real problem. So one of the things that there is the diamond mining, and the diamond mining is completely, like I mentioned, completely separate from the other gemstone mining. It is only done by NAMDEB. And if you have to get special licenses to even own a diamond, an uncut diamond in Namibia.
And so NAMDEB is just using the words Namibia and De Beers?
That's right. That's right. And it was interesting. When I first moved there, I was buying minerals from these guys. And I kept on having guys come up to me and offer me diamonds. And I I'd always say, no, I don't buy diamonds and everything. And finally, one day, the guy offered me a diamond. I said, look, it's illegal to buy diamonds. I'm not going to buy any diamonds. And I never had a diamond offered to me after that. So I think that the government actually takes really the people buying diamonds illegally very seriously.
So you think that was an entrapment
I think
situation?
because the other 2.5 years that I was there, I never had another person come up and offer me a diamond. There's big mines in Namibia. This is Rossing Uranium's been purchased by a Chinese company now, but there's big mines, copper mines. There's big zinc mine. There's a big gold mines there. There's several uranium mines in Namibia now. One time it was just Rossing, but now there's several uranium mines.
Okay, we'll shift over to the political environment.
Yeah, it does. You know, politically, they actually want people to be able to make a living and such. And so overall, the country is the political climate is supportive of artisanal mining. They actually had groups that were trying to support the miners, but they have a lot of unintended hindrances, barriers to that artisanal miners. One of them, they actually have a claim system very much similar to the United States. That you can get a claim, you can mine it on government property, but if you're going to have a claim, you actually have to go to Windhoek, the capital of the country, to file the claim. And then you have to pay some money for it, obviously. And so, these guys, they don't have cars, mm-hmm. and the capital is hundreds of miles away. And so how do you even get to the government to file a claim? Mm-hmm. And they're, just the difficulty of how to do those types of things makes it so that you almost can't mine legally in a lot of cases.
Now, if you did have a claim, would that give you a degree of protection?
It would, tenure-wise, absolutely, mm-hmm. just like a claim here in the United States would. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, their laws, a lot of the laws in Namibia are based upon U.S. laws. Mm-hmm. And so it would be the same protections as you would have here in the United States. But then they also had strange things like they had export permits. You had to get legally, you had to get an export permit for gemstones and such besides the gold and such. But you had to go again. If I bought a mineral, I'm supposed to go to the capital to get an export permit, and it was not very conducive. People thought that they couldn't legally buy collector minerals or gemstones, when in reality they could, but they just had to go through the process. And mm-hmm. so that reduced the amount of people that would buy gemstones from them and hurt their marketplace. But the people that, they usually wouldn't actually get export permits. When I went and got export permit to come back to the United States, I went into the office and they looked at me like I was crazy. And when I told them how many stones I had, they said, well, you got to bring them here. I said, well, I've got a ton, mm-hmm. literal ton of material. And they said, oh, well, we'll go to your place. And they'd never done that before. So it's something that they didn't do very often, but there are lots of minerals coming out of the country.
Uh-huh. And we've talked about the legal framework for the claims and the logistical problems of filing anything.
Yep.
Now, what sort of reserves would this be something that the government
they
would
did
set
actually
up?
have a few places. New Schwaben is a place where they mine tourmaline, and they actually set aside an area, a reserve for artisanal miners there, and so they were doing things to try to make it so that artisanal miners could be successful.
Now, would you have to get a permit to go into these areas?
No, in that particular area, it was set aside for any artisanal miner. They could go in and mine, and and it was a relatively good that there was some really good tourmaline there. And so those are the types of things that the governments can do to actually help support the artisanal miners.
Yeah, and you talked about the export requirements and the problems, well, not the problems, but just the rules for diamond production, because that's where government's going to make a lot of money on that.
Yep. But there was things that was going on in with the small scale. We actually put together a small scale miner stakeholders group, and we had a lot of different people, and it's one of the things with Rio Tinto and Ross and Uranium. They were kind of instrumental in helping make this happen, and so they brought in different groups that we had. Different business groups that we had. We had large-scale mining companies, not only Rossing, but others. And most important, we brought in the artisanal miners themselves to be a part of it. And earlier on, when I first got there, I went to a government stakeholder meeting, and they had a lot of different people there. The one group that they didn't have there was the artisanal miners.
Really?
And so, bringing actually the artisanal miners in was really important. I went back three or so years after, and that group, that small, the Rio Region Small Miners Association was still going. So I was pretty happy to see that it's still in existence.
Yeah, well, it's been my experience in Bolivia, where the cooperative miners are actually very well organized.
Yeah, the Namibia had some cooperatives as well. They had one for tantalum, for instance, and they actually came together, had a small processing plant and such. Unfortunately, it lasted a few years, and then probably some funds were mishandled and such, and so they tended to go away. But
yeah. So basically, this is what. No, this organization was something that was stimulated by your company, or
it was, and they ended up. You saw alongside the road where they were selling their materials. They actually built a kind of a protected area, because it was they formerly were right alongside the road, and it was a dirt road, and so people would go by 60 miles an hour and dust every place, and so the families were breathing dust alongside the road all the time and such. And so they actually built kind of a small building, or it wasn't that small, building for that to put their stuff in and such, which was pretty beneficial to them. And I think the point in all this stuff is, look, artisanal mining is really complex. Nobody really owns the problem. There's all these different groups with different perceptions. Some don't think they should have artisanal mining. Some think that the families need it. And so, but the key, I think, is things like this, where you actually bring the different stakeholders together and find common solutions. And if you don't understand kind of all the background, the different environments that they're working in, the different sales networks that they have, it's really hard to address this problem. And the laws that each country has really can make it almost impossible for them to do their work. Zimbabwe, at one point, the artisanal miners were had spoken up against the government, and the government came in and they destroyed their villages. They literally bulldozed them down. But stepping back a bit, we as the larger industry need to think about, how do we work with the different groups? Because they're going to be there. These are people that are trying to feed their families.
This is when you get into the whole area of sustainability and being able to maintain the local economies of some sort.
And we're going to be gone at some point. Yeah. And the families are going to be there, and the economies needs to to be there. And so we do have to think about the economy. We do have to think about how do the local people, don't become so reliant. And that was one of the worries about for Rio Tinto is they didn't want the local community to be just reliant upon the mine itself, because the mine's not going to last forever. And if you can diversify that economy, that they can be more self-reliant, it's an important step for that sustainability commitment that we have when we go into a local community.
Yeah, good. Well, that's a good thought to sunset our discussion, Brad. Thank you very much for.
You're welcome, John.
Putting all this stuff together for us, and so we thank Brad Ross for his efforts, and we'll end this particular segment right here. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Well, thank you, Brad. I think that Brad, can you come back on now? Thank you. I did have one question for you. If you could unmute yourself, there you are. What do you think would have happened to the people that offered you the diamonds if you had gone ahead and purchased something? What would have happened?
Well, they one of those little Bavarian buildings that you saw, they had one that was a jail. And as a matter of fact, I had some guys that were offering me fake minerals that had been glued together and everything. And I actually went to the authorities and said, this is a problem, because if you have people selling fake minerals, that's going to hurt your whole mineral economy for specimens and such in your country. And so they actually set up a sting, and they arrested a couple of those guys. And now they didn't keep them very long or anything, but I saw the jail that they ended up in. I really didn't want to go there.
Okay, yeah, that would really be an extended vacation of sorts there.
Too much of an extent, and they probably would have thrown me out of the country as well. But I enjoyed living there, so I didn't really want that to happen either.
Good. Well, I don't see any questions under the Q&A, and I would make a note for everyone that is participating here. We will leave there is some time at the end of the next presentation where we can have a general discussion, and that we can pose questions back and forth. Now, I understand that you probably won't be available, Ross, during or Brad, during that time.
No, I will be able to be there now. I made some changes, so
okay, good. I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate all of our people that are registered and participating. What we have now is a lunch break, and so we will break now and commence the next session at 1:00 with Professor James Hopkins, who's going to talk about some of the social issues associated with gems and mineral specimens. So thank you all, and we'll see you after lunch. Thank you.